Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. It's the last day of February, February 28th, and I am sitting here at the Loves in, I think this is technically Frenchtown, Michigan, but it's right near Monroe. And Monroe has, it was the home to General George Armstrong Custer. Custer was actually born in Ohio, moved to Michigan. I think he was recruited up here by Jim Harbaugh. But anyway, he doesn't actually attend Michigan, University of Michigan. He ends up going to West Point. He's in the class of 1861, which is the year that the Civil War started. Now, Custer was not that good of a student, and he ranked basically at the bottom of his class. And the interesting thing about that was that the people that ranked at the top of their class would typically go into the Corps of Engineers, and then going down the list, based on class rank, they would fill in other billets like infantry, artillery, quartermaster corps, whatever the Army needed. But the people with the worst class standing would end up in the cavalry. And that was George Custer. And by the way, he didn't go by George. He went by Armstrong, or another nickname he had that was his family nickname was Audie, A-U-T-I-E. But anyway, Custer ends up in the cavalry. Another guy, by the way, who's noteworthy for kind of having the same thing happen to him, although I think he was class of 1855, was this guy named James Ewell Brown Stewart, better known as Jeb Stuart because of his initials. And he was a Virginian, and he ended up being the chief of the cavalry in the Army of Northern Virginia. And Stewart was at the bottom of his class too, and that's how he kind of ended up in the cavalry. But anyway, Custer ends up ingratiating himself, not because he wasn't he didn't merit it. He came to the notice of General McClellan, George McClellan, and Custer had this ability to lead men, and he was kind of charismatic, had some panache, and he, was a good cavalry commander. And it ended up that, he would face Stewart on the battlefield a few times. Custer was involved in the battle at Brandy Station, which was part of the Gettysburg campaign. Everybody kind of knows Gettysburg, the 1st through the 3rd of July, 1863, but the campaign really started in early June. And there were several sharp engagements leading up to that battle at Gettysburg. And one of those was a cavalry engagement at Brandy Station, Virginia, which is in Culpeper County, Virginia. And it is the largest cavalry engagement ever on the North American continent, and it involved about 20,000 cavalry troopers. Actually, I take it back, a little bit more than that, probably more like 24,000 troopers. And it was just rolling hills and fields, so it was pretty, it was a protracted battle, and it was kind of a draw. But the interesting thing is that Jeb Stuart got surprised in that battle, and but for effective counterattacks, could have lost the day. The other thing that's noteworthy about Stuart, and not to digress from Custer, but Stuart really did not perform that well in the Gettysburg campaign, and Brandy Station was just the start of it. He became famous for his ride around McClellan's army during the Peninsular Campaign, but he really didn't do that great of a job in the Gettysburg campaign, and Lee constantly expressed dismay that Stuart wasn't giving him the information he needed. Stuart, so, and this is kind of how fate has a way of working, right? So anyway, in the organization, so Custer is by the Gettysburg Campaign, he is a brigade commander. So he commands all of the Michigan cavalry, and there was a pretty substantial amount of Michigan cavalry. There was like 4 cavalry regiments from Michigan. So the Michigan guys had a lot of impact on the Northern cavalry, and so Custer is a brigade commander. He's got all the Michigan cavalry, and he's in the 3rd Cavalry Division under a guy named Judson Kilpatrick, and Kilpatrick had this nickname of Kill Cavalry. But what happened during Gettysburg was that David Gregg, who was the commander of the 2nd Division, by the way, just to give you the setup, so the 1st Division, 1st Union Cavalry Division was John Buford, and his troops are the ones that first dismounted, engaged the Confederate infantry along the Chambersburg Pike, and that's when Reynolds came up and everything. But anyway, so you got Buford, Gregg, and Kilpatrick. Those are the 3 division commanders. But the Michigan cavalry during the battle itself had been detached from the 3rd Division and had been sent to put under the command of General Gregg, the 2nd Division commander. And there's this incident that happens, and it's at an intersection that you could visit today, and you know, it's always interesting because I used to drive through there every single day, right? And it's at this intersection, and it's Pennsylvania Highway 116 and Low Dutch Road outside of Gettysburg. It's 116 is what is known as the Hanover Road, so it goes to Hanover from Gettysburg. And right near that intersection on the northeast quadrant of that intersection is what is called the East Cavalry Field. And so what happened was Gregg and Custer are there at that intersection on July 3rd, 1863. And basically Gregg says to Custer, hey, I don't need you any longer. Would you like to go back and report back to General Kilpatrick, who is in an area to the south of where the main battle is going on? And Custer demurs and basically says, well, you know, I'm happy to just stick with you, and then, you know, I can go at the end of the day or whatever. And that decision may have actually saved Custer's life. And the reason I say that is this: Custer would later be engaged that day in heavy fighting with Stuart's cavalry on the East Cavalry Field, and that's almost like a separate battlefield from the Gettysburg battlefield, but you can visit, you could drive through it. There's monuments out there, there's artillery pieces. I used to ride my bicycle through there all the time because it was, I don't know, it's like 10 miles from where I used to live. But anyway, and by the way, the Union cavalry, especially the Michigan Brigade, acquitted themselves very well at this, and they kind of drove the Confederates from the field. And they were there to screen, you know, they were there to make sure that nobody could come up on the backside of the Union positions. So anyway, what ends up happening though is that kind of as the battle's winding down and the Confederates are retreating from the field on the 3rd, Judson Kilpatrick orders a cavalry charge towards this you know, pile of Confederate infantry. Now these guys had just been beaten back by the Union infantry, but infantry is a much superior, well, cavalry is no match for infantry because cavalry cannot mass its firepower like the infantry could. And, you know, the thing is with the cavalry, with the range that the rifles had back then, the cavalry really couldn't even get that close to like overrun an infantry position. So, but Kilpatrick, because Kilpatrick's, you know, the forces under his command really hadn't been engaged, he wants to get in the fight. So he orders his 1st Brigade commander, a guy by the name of Elon Farnsworth, to charge this Confederate infantry, which I guess turned out to be a bunch of Georgia troops. And predictably, they were repulsed. And then they were ordered to charge again. And eventually, Farnsworth is mortally wounded, or killed, actually. And, you know, a bunch of Union cavalrymen lose their lives in a useless attack, right? It didn't change the outcome of the battle. It was just ego. And, you know, that happens sometimes in war. But I always have wondered if Custer lived another 11 years because of his decision, well, no, another 13 years because of his decision to just hang with General Gregg's command. Even though Custer was in the fight, he didn't shy away from that. But I feel like he would have been involved in that charge that Farnsworth's troopers made, and it would have ended just as badly. So anyway, Custer, you know, he ends up being a major general of volunteers. In 1876, on June 25th of 1876, he then loses his life in the Battle of Little Bighorn. Custer was actually a lieutenant colonel when he died, regular Army lieutenant colonel. I have a lot of mixed feelings about Custer and his final campaigns. I think he was let down by his subordinates, particularly Major Marcus Reno. But, you know, Custer is just an interesting historical figure, and he grew up here in Monroe. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about about a famous citizen from Monroe. So, you know, sometimes, like, I got this pre-plan the other day, and night or weekend dispatch, they're like, hey, are you okay with the pre-plan? And my exact words were, frankly, I think it sucks, but I'll take it. And I was right. It sucked, or it sucks, because it's still ongoing. So over, what time is it? Anyway, like 28 hours ago, I had the delivery on that. But here's what happened at the outset. So I go to the 01, which is down in outside of Harrisonburg, Virginia. And, you know, I go in, I give him my info, and I already knew it was a 2-stop load. So I go in, I give my info, and this dude's like, okay, go in door 14, don't open your doors, reefer set, blah, 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 right? So I do that. And then I put myself in the sleeper berth and I go take a nap because it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. No, it's, I don't know. It was the middle of the night. I can't remember when I had to be there, but I think it was 4 or whatever, yeah. So anyway, I go to sleep. Over a couple hours, like 2 hours and 15 minutes later, I get a call, and it's this lady, and she's very pleasant, and she's like, hey, you know, it turns out that the night shift put you in the wrong door, but if you could move to door 32, we'll get you loaded and get you out here. I'm like, okay. So I move over to door 32, and I go back to sleep. So like 3 hours after that, I get a call, hey, your bills are ready. I'm like, okay. So I go in, and she gives me 4 different bills of lading, and I got them sitting here on my dash. And, you know, off I go, right? So I get up here to Michigan yesterday morning I had a 04 and a 06 appointment for my 02 and 90, but they're at the same location at the Meijer Distribution Center here. So I check in, and they're having trouble checking me in because it turns out that one of the POs is not showing up in their system. Well, come to find out, the reason that the PO is not showing up in their system is because that same PO has been brought in by another prime driver. And what happened was that the shipper decided to split the PO between two different trucks. But which is okay if the trucks don't have other POs on them, because otherwise it leads to like a ton of confusion. So Meijer's system recognizes the PO, but once it doesn't recognize it twice. Once that PO has been logged in, then you can't log it in again, right? And so they call the receiving office and they're like, oh, hey, you know, what should we do? And they're like, well, you know, have this guy scan his bills in, and because you scan them in when you go there after you talk to the folks. Scan the bills in and we'll give them a door assignment. I'm like, okay. So I get a door assignment, and since they had called receiving, I was kind of cautiously optimistic that maybe they would just unload the whole truck, even though my load was technically for three different departments. So I go there, and then I get the text message with my bills, and it's basically says, hey, you're good to go. I'm like, okay, cool. So, you know, I pull away and I go back to close my doors, and I look in the trailer and I realize there's like 5 pallets still in there, all up at the front. I'm like, okay, so I close my doors, I turn my reefer back on. I had turned it off briefly, turn it back on, and I go through the bills that they had sent me electronically, and then I realized that one of the bills they did not sign electronically. 3 of them were signed and said no OS&D, and 1 wasn't. So I go back to the gate, and they're like, are you empty? I'm like, no, I have this other stuff. And they didn't sign my bill. And they're like, oh, you have a split load, just go wait in the bullpen and they'll send you a text with another loading dock. So I wait. And then I wait. And then I wake up and I tell my fleet manager I'm still waiting. So by like 4:30 yesterday, I'm like, you know what? I really need to use the bathroom, and I want to take a shower, and I'm hungry because I haven't had a chance to stop at Walmart and get much food on my truck. So I'm like out of fruit. You know, I don't have any bananas. I don't have any apples. I don't really have, you know, I got some cheese. I always got cheese. But yeah, not much else, right? And I'm also getting low on Diet Coke, and that cannot stand. So I know this Love's is here, so I'm like, I tell my fleet manager, I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna go down to Love's and then we'll try to figure this out. So this morning I realized that I'm gonna get nowhere with Meijer, because and I started to realize too that they probably had a claim on the PO that they brought in on the other guy's truck. They're probably like, oh, there's these 5 pallets missing, and he probably filed claims. So I call claims and I'm like, what do I do? And so I've sent all the bills, I sent pictures, I sent also supplements to the bills with the signed bills that I already have. And I know exactly what's back there because it's the one bill. Everything matches up. All the case numbers match up. The cases that they accepted is exactly equal to the 3 other bills. So I know exactly what I have. I have one PO that was partial, but I know, everything's back there. So now I'm just sitting here waiting for claims to tell me what to do with this stuff. But I'm not optimistic. I just, my fleet manager's like, hopefully it gets handled quickly. I'm like, dude, quickly, the train that Quickly was on left the station like 10 hours ago. And I said I had a bad feeling about this load when I took it, and my feeling was justified. So, someday, it's kind of like, and I'm not super upset. People would say, well, if you had a bad feeling about this load, why did you take it? For the same reason I've had a bad feeling about other stuff in my life, but I still went ahead and did it. Like when I was in the military, I would kind of know when something was going to really suck, but did I not do it? No, I just forged ahead, and like that's what we all did, right? There was a class at Buds that had their motto was, if we didn't do it, it didn't suck. And sometimes you're just like, yeah, this is gonna suck, right? Whether it's the weather or the sea state, whatever it is, right? But you're gonna get. It's like when I was on the fire department. I mean, every once in a while you go on a call and you're rolling up on a place. You're like, this is gonna suck, right? Because firefighting is hard, and it's hard. It's hot. It's sweaty. It's like tons of exertion. You're like, this is gonna suck, but somebody's got to do it, right? And I kind of felt like this load I was kind of taking one for the team, because I hated it. I didn't like the deadhead. I didn't like the money. I didn't like, and the deadhead was basically like the same. So once I got loaded, I was going retracing my deadhead route, which I always hate doing, because I'm like, I want to go somewhere different. I don't want to drive back and forth on the same road. I mean, it happens a little bit, but this was like hundreds of miles on the same road until I got back up to like the PA Turnpike or whatever. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Hopefully, excuse me, they'll figure out what to do with this stuff, and I can get on with my life. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon. Bye.